Welcome to the Archaeology Studio. Today's episode guides through the process of revealing layers of landscapes in a natural chronological order of the archaeological record. As an illustrative example, I will share my work at Kawaihae of Leeward, Hawaii Island, conducted in 2003 and 2004. When I still was developing and testing my general research approach about landscape chronologies. This particular project offered an opportunity to coordinate a rich ethnohistory of a landscape with a series of material archaeological layers. The project in Kawaihae specifically was at Pu'ukohola Heiau National Historic Site, managed by the U.S. National Park Service. As a private contractor, I was hired to document the surviving remnants of the historic site, in accordance with U.S. government regulations. The initial round of funding in 2003 was sufficient to document the surface visible elements of the site and to verify that significant subsurface components were hidden from modern view in deep and old layers beneath the ground today. Next, a supplemental round of funding in 2004 enabled more excavation of those subsurface layers, in total contributing to a comprehensive chronology of how the landscape had developed and changed through several centuries. The National Historic Site here refers to the birthplace of the historically known Hawaiian kingdom of the Kamehameha dynasty during the late 1700s through early 1800s. During a few decades, Kawaihae was the seat of power of Kamehameha and his closest supporters. When Kamehameha's primary rivals were defeated, sacrifices were dedicated at this site. Meanwhile, domestic and foreign influencers resided here and shaped the political, ideological, and economic future of the region. The most prominent landscape feature today is the massive stonework ruin of Pu'ukohola Heiau. The name translates as the Temple of the Hill of the Whale. When approaching from the sea, the construction could resemble the shape of a whale. Additionally, the visual perspective makes the Heiau appear taller than the Kohala mountain range at the island's interior. During the early 1790s, Kamehameha's primary challenger, Keoa, approached the shore here, and he was slain and sacrificed for the war god, Kukailimoku, at Pu'ukohola Heiau. More broadly, this event symbolized Kamehameha's divine right to rule over the region, legitimized by the god of war. At that time, Kamehameha was in the process of waging wars against other chiefs of different islands of the archipelago, but his seat of power remained at Kawaihae. His closest allies and loyalists lived here, including historical icons such as Keeaumoku. Another famous local resident was John Young, an English sailor who was captured and eventually served as a royal advisor. Among John Young's contributions were his knowledge of the use of firearms in battles. Furthermore, his influence led to the conversion of an older temple of Mailekini Heiau into an armed fort with cannons. The older religion and context of Mailekini Heiau essentially was transformed into a symbol of military power during the Kamehameha dynasty. The previous traditions of Mailekini Heiau were replaced by the new armed fort, and the setting itself was overpowered by the dominance of Pu'ukohola Heiau, dedicated to the god of war, Kukailimoku. By the middle 1790s, the Kamehameha dynasty emerged as the ruling power of the Hawaiian Islands. Foreigners, such as Captain George Vancouver, were obligated to stop first at Kawaihae for an audience with the king, or later with his son, Liholiho, in order to initiate any business in the islands. In 1794, George Vancouver negotiated a treaty with Kamehameha, who then declared that the people of Hawaii were now people of Britain, or Brittany. The spoken Hawaiian version of Britain or Brittany has become known today as Pelikane, and Pelikane is the name of the specific place of the royal houses of Kamehameha, his immediate family and retinue, and later his son Liholiho. The treaty between Vancouver and Kamehameha never was approved by the British Crown or government, yet the naming of Pelikane delivered a permanent effect into the landscape itself. The place now known as Pelikane, of course, is a central focus in the landscape today, but the naming of Pelikane could not have happened until 1794. Prior to that time, the place must have been known by a different name. The surviving references are vague, but a name similar to Kikiakoi could refer to this place during the time when Bailikine Heiau still had been functioning as a temple, and before the war temple of Pu'ukohola was constructed. Yet another fascinating feature at the site is the enigmatic shrine of Haleokapuni, literally meaning the House of Kapuni. Kapuni was mentioned in Hawaiian traditions as a priest who lived here prior to Kamehameha's time and when the place was known as Kikiakoi. The shrine reportedly was constructed in the shallow offshore water, where it was depicted in a map of the year 1819, but apparently the shrine has crumbled into rubble, now submerged beneath the water. During Kamehameha's time at Pelikane, the shrine of Haleokapuni was associated with sharks that frequented the shallow water. At least one and perhaps two of Kamehameha's staff chiefs would find and kill people, then throw their bodies as chum to the sharks around the shrine of Haleokapuni. According to the Hawaiian traditions, a stone leaning post was the customary place for viewing the shark-feeding events. This stone sometimes has been called Kamehameha's chair. Later, Kamehameha's son Liholiho lived here, met with foreign visitors and dignitaries, and witnessed the overturn of the Hawaiian religious system in 1819. The religious function and authority dwindled at Pu'ukohola and throughout the islands, and eventually the religious sites were abandoned as functioning temples. Meanwhile, traditional residences and other sites were abandoned, including the royal residence at Pelikane, while the next generations of people pursued new directions in social, economic, and political structure. Everyone can appreciate the significance of this place in the formation of the historically known Hawaiian kingdom during the decades of the late 1700s through early 1800s. The historical records offer much more than what I have summarized, but even just this brief summary can clarify the scope and impact of the historical events that occurred here. At this site, the stonework ruins, the place names, and the landscape itself all convey a sense of the rich ethnohistory and traditions that can be experienced by all people who visit today at Pu'ukohola Heiau National Historic Site. When I was hired to document the archaeological components of the site, my initial thoughts were about the potential for archaeology to reveal aspects of the site beyond what already was known through the extensive ethnohistory and written documentary evidence. In my view, the historical significance of the site and of the place already had been well documented, and the official site designation already had specified the ethnohistory as the justification for Pu'ukohola Heiau National Historic Site. In this case, archaeology could serve primarily to validate the known history in connection with the surviving stonework ruins as visible on the surface today. In terms of documenting the known historic site components, the procedures involve simple mapping, description, and recording. In this case, the role of traditional archaeology was minimal, and the documentation did not change the state of knowledge about the site. Naturally, all of these surface visible components could be related to the last time when people actively used the site, during the 1790s through 1820s. Nonetheless, the site documentation allowed a cohesive view of a large area of a holistic landscape setting. The known historical context could be applied to the remnants of the royal residence at Pelikane, the ruins of Pu'ukohola Heiau, the converted fort at Mailikini, and all of the other elements on the surface today. The time period was less certain for other parts of the site. For example, in a nearby gully, panels of petroglyph art depicted human figures that potentially could belong to any time period. Extremely rare instances of painted pictograph rock art included a white figure of a person and another red pigment that showed a person with a horse or similar animal, definitely belonging to the historical period of the 1790s or later, after horses and cattle were introduced to the islands. As in most places of the Hawaiian Islands, the volcanic landforms offered little or no opportunity for deep sedimentary units or layers. Instead, the surface visible features were embedded in shallow rocky soils or directly on the volcanic bedrock. Given the natural setting, nearly all of the known archaeological sites of Hawaii have been identified on the basis of their surface visible stonework ruins, just as was the case here in Kawaihae. Mostly, those contexts have been dated to the 1600s or later. Rarely, site layers have been dated to the 1400s, and only extremely rare instances have been dated earlier than the year 1400. In a larger regional view, people first inhabited the Hawaiian Islands after the year AD 1000. Given the remoteness of these islands, they were among the last places on Earth to be inhabited. The actual physical evidence, however, has been vague and sparse for the context prior to the 1400s, while the later historical periods have been extensively documented. At face value, the setting at Kawaihae offered a glimpse into a royal and religious precinct of the historical period, linked with the birthplace of the Hawaiian kingdom. The surviving stonework ruins represented exceptionally well-made and well-preserved examples of Hawaiian sites in general. Furthermore, the large area of preserved land offered a unique opportunity to document a cohesive landscape context. Only certain of the landforms here showed potential for subsurface layers, by definition predating the surface visible contexts. Generally speaking, sediments tend to erode and wash down slopes and then accumulate in spots of lower elevations. In the Hawaiian Islands, these kinds of settings exist among some, but not all, bases of slopes, for example along some river valleys and coastlines. Most of those spots have been transformed by historical and modern land developments, but the site here at Kawaihae still retained an opportunity to excavate into precisely this kind of setting where older sedimentary units might be found. The royal residence of Pelikane was built at a low elevation spot near the coastline. On the inland sides, sediments had been eroding and washing down from the rocky slopes in different directions, all accumulating at this spot. Additionally, the location was within reach of coastal depositional and erosional processes. In this setting, I knew for sure that I would find older sedimentary layers beneath the surface. In this case, the only questions were about how old those layers were, what kinds of environmental context existed during each of those time intervals, and whether or not they contained archaeological evidence of ancient cultural activities within the measurable time frames. My research approach started with detailed mapping of the entire site area, including not only the stonework features, but also the land itself, in carefully measured elevation contours. With this baseline of mapping data, I could situate each of the excavations within the surrounding environment and elevation above sea level. I was allowed to excavate only a few small test pits, and I needed to maximize the information of each narrow window into the subsurface layers. Right away, the small test pits exposed deeper and older layers directly beneath the surface visible stonework ruins. In fact, multiple layers of stonework features were evident. This finding alone was extraordinary in Hawaiian archaeology. I documented the constructions in detailed scale drawings and photographs from multiple angles at every step of the excavations. With the attention to the elevation contour mapping, I could cross-compare the findings in each test pit. In this case, I could identify if the same sedimentary units appeared in separate locations across the site, and then I could produce a map of the spatial extent of each layer, one by one, in chronological order. I was able to show the chronological sequence of sedimentary units over the last several centuries, dating back to the AD 1200s, and therefore ranking among the oldest known sites in the Hawaiian Islands. The oldest time period was bracketed between AD 1200 and 1400. At that time, the area was a small inlet with shallow water reaching to the bases of the rocky slopes. In two small spots of this ancient seashore, people had discarded dense concentrations of fish bones, shellfish debris, burned wood, bones of pigs and dogs, a few pieces of flake stone, fragments of fishing hooks, and assorted other materials. Next, within the range of AD 1400 through 1600, slope-eroded sediments accumulated more thickly and started to fill the inland side of the shallow water inlet. Meanwhile, people began to use more spots along the ancient coastline. In the following period of AD 1600 through 1790, the slope-eroded sediments filled a much larger area. Meanwhile, Heiau was constructed as a religious monument, and the coastline supported a formal residential settlement with numbers of stonework house foundations. The period of 1790 through 1830 referred to the surface visible stonework ruins and the sedimentary units of those stonework constructions. In the lowest elevation area of the site, nearest to the coastline, artificial stone filling had transformed the shallow water and mucky shoreline zone into a stone-paved surface. In this setting, the royal residence of Pelikane was constructed. Ukohola Heiau was built and dedicated. Heiau was converted into an armed fort with cannons, and the larger historical events of the site proceeded as known in the ethnohistory. Around the year 1830, the site was abandoned as an active place of living, yet it has sustained with abundant reminders of the historical period. Sedimentary units started to cover portions of the coastal zone, while natural erosional processes have caused variable degrees of decay across the site overall. With deliberate programs of preservation and maintenance, the site as a whole has retained its integrity and its ability to convey a sense of its significance. In total, the archaeological evidence at Kawaihae revealed much more than could meet the eye on the surface today. Quite simply, the subsurface archaeological layers predated the surface visible and historically known contexts. The results provided a chronological narrative of how the landscape has changed through several centuries since the AD 1200s. The landscape chronology here combined the lines of evidence about the shapes of landforms and habitat configurations with the remnants of cultural actions, as seen in food middens and stonework ruins. In this case, the natural history and cultural history could be coordinated together within measurable sedimentary layers of the landscape. The dated sequence of the layers provided the basis for a unified landscape chronology. In concluding this episode, now you should be familiar with layers of landscapes, specifically as illustrated at Kawaihae in Hawaii and generally applicable throughout the world. You can consider how to obtain multiple lines of evidence about ancient landscapes in chronological order. And you can consider how those multiple factors contributed through long timescales to the landscapes that we inhabit today. Please remember to subscribe to this channel, tell your friends about it, and see new videos every month with the Archaeology Studio.